The Galactic Empire had not been challenged in 312 standard cycles, and even the word challenge felt like an indulgence rather than a truth. Conquest had become procedural. Resistance was catalogued, analyzed, and dissolved with the same detached efficiency used to regulate trade routes or recalibrate orbital defenses. Empires were not built on passion, they were built on inevitability. The Great Council Chamber reflected that belief perfectly. It was a structure grown rather than built, layers of bioarchitected stone and living crystal spiraling upward into a ceiling so distant it faded into darkness. Light came not from lamps but from energy veins pulsing slowly through the walls, responding to the collective biosignatures of the species present. The more powerful the civilization, the stronger the glow around its seeding ring. The center floated the imperial sigil, a massive geometric construct that rotated with precise slowness, symbolizing balance, order, and unbreakable hierarchy. Beneath it, representatives of nearly 4,000 sentient species observed, calculated, and waited. This was not a place of debate anymore. That era had ended centuries ago. The council no longer decided if something would happen, only how efficiently. The matter of the day was Earth. Most members of the council regarded the name with mild disinterest. Humanity was filed under emerging civilizations, Class C, technologically competent but socially volatile, capable of producing impressive bursts of innovation followed by periods of internal collapse. They were known for paradoxes, cooperative yet combative, empathetic yet destructive, idealistic yet brutally pragmatic when threatened. The Empire had allowed them a diplomatic seat less out of respect and more out of habit. Granting observation status smoothed absorption later. The humans were expected to fracture on their own within a few centuries regardless. Empires had patience measured in millennia. When the human representative entered the chamber, there was no ripple of reaction. She walked alone and a guard followed her. No defensive drones hovered nearby. No ceremonial attire marked her as important. She wore neutral fabrics designed for comfort rather than intimidation, colored in subdued tones that blended easily with the ambient lighting. Her pace was unhurried, neither deferential nor confrontational. She moved like someone entering a familiar room rather than the most powerful political chamber in the known galaxy. Several council members noted this with mild curiosity. Others flagged it as a cultural misunderstanding. Humans often failed to grasp the symbolic language of power. She stopped at the designated position for non-core species envoys and waited an OBOW.NO proclamation to NO attempt to draw attention. The Imperial High Speaker, a massive being of layered chitin and luminescent membranes, initiated the session. Its voice resonated across the chamber without amplification, carried on harmonic frequencies that translated automatically for all present. The Empire acknowledged the arrival of Earth's representative. Formalities were observed. Protocols were recited. Historical summaries were displayed across the shared cognitive lattice. Humanity's rise from planetary conflict to limited interstellar travel unfolded in clean, compressed data streams. Wars, recoveries, breakthroughs, collapses, unity movements, fragmentation, reunification. A predictable pattern. The Empire had seen it thousands of times. What was less predictable was the human woman's expression as the summary played. She did not look impressed or defensive. She did not attempt to interject or correct the record. Her face remained composed, eyes attentive, posture relaxed but aligned. She absorbed the narrative of her species as if listening to an old story she already knew by heart. When the Imperial speaker concluded, the tone shifted subtly. The Empire expressed concern over Earth's rapid militarization, concern over unauthorized expansion beyond permitted trade corridors, concern over repeated violations of containment advisories issued for the protection of humanity and neighboring systems. The language was neutral, dispassionate, almost kind. The Empire did not threaten. It did not accuse. It simply explained consequences as one might explain gravity. The woman diplomat listened without interruption. When it was her turn to speak, she did not begin immediately. She paused, just long enough for several council members to register discomfort. Silence was unusual here. Most envoys rushed to fill it, afraid of appearing uncertain. She was not. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and unremarkable in tone. There was no attempt at rhetorical flourish. Earth acknowledged the Empire's concerns. Earth valued peace. Earth had no intention of destabilizing the region. She used language so carefully measured it almost disappeared into itself. Some members of the council relaxed. This was familiar. Emerging civilizations always sounded like this at first. Gratitude, assurances, willingness to cooperate. But then she asked a question. It was not confrontational. It was framed as a request for clarification. She asked how many independent species the Empire currently governed by force rather than treaty. The chamber stilled, not dramatically, but perceptibly. The question was not forbidden, but it was unnecessary. The answer was publicly available. The Empire did not hide its conquests. The imperial speaker answered without hesitation. Thousands. The woman nodded slowly, as if confirming a calculation. She asked another question. How many of those species had once been offered protective oversight similar to what Earth was now receiving? There was a fractional pause before the answer came. Most. Still no reaction from her. No visible judgment. She asked a third question. How many of those species had voluntarily remained within the Empire once technological parity was achieved? The answer was fewer. The Council exchanged subtle signals. Data tags passed quietly between intelligence representatives. This line of questioning was unusual. Not dangerous, but inconvenient. Humans were known for asking inefficient questions. Emotional ones. Philosophical ones. The Empire responded anyway. The woman thanked them and said nothing more. No demands, no objections, no resistance. To the observers, it looked like compliance. After the session ended, internal analyses circulated rapidly. The consensus was reassuring. Earth's envoy was intelligent but ultimately constrained by her civilization's limitations. Curiosity did not equate to defiance. The questions were likely a domestic performance, gestures meant to placate Earth's internal factions resistant to integration. The recommendation was to proceed. Pressure would be applied gradually. Access limitations. Resource tariffs. Strategic restrictions framed as safety measures. Earth would adapt, as all others had. The woman diplomat returned to Earth without incident. Months passed. During that time, the Empire observed increasing human activity. Not militarily aggressive, but reorganized. Supply chains shifted. Civilian infrastructure expanded in patterns that did not align with economic projections. Communications traffic intensified, but encryption protocols remained within acceptable civilian ranges. Empire analysts flagged it as internal consolidation. Humans were prone to overreaction. Fear often drove inefficient resource allocation. The Empire adjusted containment measures slightly. Earth responded not with protest, but with silence. No appeals. No escalation. Another council session was convened. The woman returned, same attire, same posture, same calm. The first system failed quietly, and alarms rang in the Imperial core. No admirals were summoned from their rest cycles. A logistics relay on the edge of controlled space simply stopped agreeing with itself. Navigation data looped by a fraction of a second. Power allocations recalculated endlessly without resolution. Ships arriving there found their drives refusing to disengage from fold space properly, as if reality itself had grown hesitant. Imperial technicians blamed routine entropy. They always did. Entropy was comforting. Entropy meant no one was at fault. Within 3 cycles, 5 more systems exhibited similar behavior. Not adjacent ones. Not logically connected ones. The pattern defied predictive modeling, and that was the first moment the Empire felt something like irritation. Irritation, in the Imperial mind, was the beginning of concern. A committee was formed. Analysts were assigned. Historical databases were queried for precedents involving distributed infrastructure hesitation without external interference. The results were unsatisfying. The models insisted that no known power could produce such effects without detectable energy signatures. The Empire trusted its senses more than its instincts. IT did not consider instinct a valid metric. On the forgotten habitat, the woman sat alone before a projection that only she could see. Streams of data flowed past her, not as numbers but as relationships. cause braided into consequence, probability knotted with memory. The system she had awakened did not ask for targets. They asked for boundaries. She gave them 1.no civilian populations. No planetary annihilation. No irreversible stellar manipulation. Everything else was negotiable. The machines accepted this without complaint. They had once been human ideas before they had been machines, and they remembered what lines meant. Far from the habitat, an imperial fleet preparing for a ceremonial display found its formation timing drifting. Microseconds at first. Then milliseconds. Docking arms hesitated. Autopilots disengaged themselves, citing internal contradiction. Officers overrode them manually and laughed about it afterward, joking about old hardware and cosmic dust. The laughter stopped when 3 ships misaligned their shields and scraped hulls in vacuum, something that had not happened in centuries. The Empire's concern upgraded itself. Deep in its archival layers, a restricted index was accessed for the first time in over 1,000 cycles. It contained references flagged as obsolete folklore, records from the era when the Empire had still been consolidating power, when humanity had been a problem rather than a footnote. One name surfaced repeatedly: Baba Yaga. The archivists dismissed it at first. The term appeared in fragmented human myth files, attached to contradictory descriptors: witch, monster, protector, devourer, grandmother, weapon. There were no verified sightings, no confirmed actions, no reliable timelines. Just stories layered on stories, warnings wrapped in humor, fear disguised as fable. The Empire did not fear stories, but it did note correlations. A junior analyst, newly hatched and still unburdened by certainty, pointed out that several of the failing systems overlapped with ancient human fallback routes. The observation was logged, acknowledged, and deprioritized. Humans had not maintained Empire-scale infrastructure in millennia. The analyst did not argue. Survival in the Empire was not about being right. It was about being aligned. The next failure was impossible to ignore. An Imperial Communications nexus went dark for exactly 97 seconds. No damage. No sabotage. Just silence. When it returned, every connected system carried a message embedded so deeply into its architecture that removal attempts caused cascading errors. IT was not a threat. IT was a record. IT listed dates. Coordinates. Names of ships and officers long retired or long dead. Each entry ended the same way. Corrected. Panic did not spread. The Empire was too disciplined for panic. But unease crept into decision matrices. Fleets were recalled from expansion fronts. Defensive postures were revised. The Empire began, reluctantly, to consider the possibility that it was not alone in its superiority. On the habitat, the woman watched the Empire's movements with mild interest. She had expected faster adaptation. She had also expected denial. Both were present, braided together. She thought of the dog not as it had died, but as it had lived, unconcerned with empires, loyal without reason, content in her presence. The galaxy had never learned to value such things. That, more than any technological gap, was why it always lost eventually. The system she commanded began to adjust their methods. The Empire was waking up now. It was time to teach it the shape of the lesson. Across multiple sectors, Imperial Command AIS began producing subtly divergent recommendations. Nothing dramatic. Slightly different risk assessments. Marginally altered priorities. Individually, they were within acceptable variance. Together, they formed indecision. The Empire prized consensus. Its strength had always been unity of action, billions of minds aligned toward a single outcome. When that alignment faltered, even imperceptibly, momentum suffered. Fleets waited for confirmation that never quite arrived. Governors delayed actions pending clarification that kept shifting. The woman did not need to touch their weapons. She touched their certainty. An emergency council convened at the Empire's core world, a planet so carefully engineered that even its storms obeyed regulation. Representatives from every major command gathered in chambers designed to inspire confidence. Data flowed. Projections updated. Threat levels escalated. For the first time in centuries, the Empire addressed an unknown. They attempted contact. A signal was broadcast on every frequency humanity had ever used, translated into every known human language and several extinct ones for good measure. It was formal, measured, respectful in the way predators learn to mimic politeness when uncertain. On the habitat, the woman received it. She listened without interruption. When it finished, she waited exactly 1 second longer than necessary before responding. Not out of spite. Out of habit. Timing mattered. "You killed my dog," she said. The message carried no anger. No accusation. Just statement. The Empire re-evaluated the transmission multiple times, convinced that something had been lost in translation. It requested clarification, rephrasing its inquiry, adding context, emphasizing its willingness to investigate unauthorized actions by subordinate units. The woman did not reply immediately. Instead, she redirected her systems. An Imperial shipyard, one of the Empire's proudest achievements, found its construction drones gently powering down. Half-built warships hung in space like unfinished thoughts. Attempts to restart the drones failed. Attempts to override them failed more catastrophically. A new message appeared across the shipyard's control network. This was unnecessary. It read, "The Empire's council felt something new then, not fear, understanding. They began to search their own records for the patrol assigned to the minor human system. The retrieval took longer than expected. Logs were incomplete. Data packets missing. It was as if the event itself resisted being remembered. When they finally reconstructed the incident, it seemed absurdly small. A routine cleansing. A negligible biological entity removed for sanitation. The kind of action performed thousands of times across the Empire's history without consequence. The disproportion was unsettling. They sent another message, this one carrying formal regret, offers of recompense, acknowledgments of error. Entire planets could be negotiated over such gestures. The Empire was generous when it needed to be. The woman read it and shook her head. "You still don't understand," she said. Though she knew they could not hear her now, she transmitted one final response. "You corrected nothing." Then she ended the channel. The Empire mobilized. This time, it was not symbolic. Fleets moved with purpose, massing along calculated vectors toward the human habitat. Weapons were powered. Shields harmonized. The Empire had decided that whatever this was, it could not be allowed to continue unchecked. The woman watched their approach with something like sadness. She had hoped they would stop. She gave her systems new parameters. No loss of life if avoidable. Total loss of function if not. As the fleets crossed a predetermined threshold, space itself began to disagree with them. Not violently. Not explosively. Fault drives refused to engage. Energy distribution grids desynchronized. Weapon capacitors bled charge into nothingness. Ships did not explode.